Hello once again, and thanks for joining us for Monday's edition of Alaska Weather. Up first, pretty strong storm system for July, midsummer storm affecting much of interior Alaska with rain and wind or a combination of the two during the day today. Just pulled some peak wind gusts off the observations I saw. Farewell, the highest one there, west-southwest Alaska area, 72 miles per hour, and then off to the east there on the north side of the Alaskan Range, Delta Junction, peak wind gusts so far of 62 miles per hour, and then in the northern Kuskokwim Valley there to the southwest of McGrath, Flat had a peak wind gust 57 miles an hour, Dillingham 52 miles per hour, and also winds gusting in the 50 to 55 mile per hour range, east Anchorage, Turnagain Arm down toward Portage today. And from there, taking a look at hazardous weather graphic, there's a high wind warning out for tonight for eastern Norton Sound, and that includes Unalakleet, Stebbins, St. Michael, Elam, Koyuk, and Shaktoolik. And that's out for the overnight period tonight until possibly early tomorrow morning. That's for southwest winds, 35 gusting 65 miles per hour. Otherwise, there's a high surf advisory out tonight until noon Wednesday for the north side of the Seward Peninsula, also for Kotzebue Sound and the northwest coast for possible minor beach erosion due to the high surf with the gusty winds that low center pulls up toward the western Arctic coast around Point Hope, Cape Lisburne area and slowly weakens. Those winds will kick the sea heights up, or at least the surf up there that could cause some minor beach erosion again through Wednesday morning. And then finally for the Alaska Range, wind advisory out for tonight, and that's for south winds 30 gusting 65 miles per hour, much like we've seen happening throughout the day today. And from there going on to satellite imagery, first fire danger. A lot of blue over the central, northern, western, southern part of the state into the panhandle with the rainfall that's been going on. Otherwise, not so much rain and gusty wind conditions, producing a big area of very high fire danger there over the upper Yukon River area, the Yukon Flats and uplands, with the temperatures today right approaching 80 degrees. I believe it was Chalkyitsik, 79 degrees mid-afternoon. 70s up in that area, and also some high fire danger, that very high fire danger on the north side of the eastern Alaska Range due to the gusty wind conditions there, and also temperatures approaching 70 degrees, so dry enough to kick it back into the very high category. And then some high fire danger around Nenana and the greater Fairbanks area there, temperatures into the 70s, winds not quite as gusty there. And from next slide, satellite imagery shows that strong to reasonably intense midsummer storm tracking northward across the western Norton Sound into the Seward Peninsula today, and bringing the gusty winds and fair amount of rain across the pretty widespread area of the state today. Caltag had over an inch of rain, 1.09 inches in the last 24 hours. Anvik had 0.8 of an inch of precipitation, and then Koyuk up in northeastern or Norton Bay in the northeastern Norton Sound area there, 3/4 of an inch of rain, and then lighter amounts as you head east. Winds gusting again in south central Alaska, Palmer, Anchorage, seeing 40 to 50 mile an hour wind gusts out of the southeast throughout the day today. And that front bringing some pretty good rainfall into the North Gulf Coast, over an inch falling in Cordova, and more lighter amounts of the Copper River Basin, especially in the downsloping areas there. And some sunshine over the southern panhandle, temperature up to 70 degrees at mid-afternoon at Stewart, otherwise mid to upper 60s, Ketchikan over toward Prince of Wales Island. And not too bad Kodiak Island. Aleutian seeing some sunshine in areas today, some breaks there as well as the Bering Sea. Pribilof's though right in the thick of the clouds. And rolling this through again, you can see the low center tracking northward to the Seward Peninsula, and the front weakening, slowly pushing eastward, but still enough of a gradient to keep those gusty winds across south central Alaska. Rainfall amounts not all that heavy, about 1/10 of an inch in Anchorage, and the heaviest amounts back to the west and north, especially on the southern slopes of the Brooks Range there. And rolling this again, you can see that eastward movement, not a whole lot, not a big push, but gradually the pattern will shift eastward slowly. Main low center pulling northward and stalling out over the Seward Peninsula. Really, that's why the front's weakening as it pulls away from the center. And on the surface map today, 989 millibar center, tracking northward across the Seward Peninsula with widespread area of rain, central western part of the state, and not so much rain over the eastern areas north of the Alaska Range. Pretty dry conditions there up to the eastern Arctic coast, and a little bit of rain into the northern Panhandle, heaviest along the eastern North Gulf Coast areas. Prince William Sound areas seeing some pretty good rainfall, but dry over the southern Panhandle. High pressure, as we saw, keeping it partly sunny in areas of the Aleutians and southern Bering Sea there, with winds on the light side. And for tonight, again, that high wind warning as that low pulls northward to the northwest coast. Trough swings in on the south side of that. That'll help kick those winds up to 65 miles an hour. Again, eastern Norton Sound there, Nulato Hills, Unalakleet, Stebbins, St. Michael, Elam, those areas, Koyuk. Again, as winds will start to slowly diminish over the eastern Alaska Range later tonight, but the wind advisory out until early tomorrow morning for that area. And the heaviest rainfall again will be back to the west and northwest part of the state, drying out over south central Alaska. Look for a fair amount of clearing, even up into the Sitna Valley, western Copper River Basin. Area of rain lingering there for the eastern North Gulf Coast into the northern Panhandle, but staying dry over the southern southeast coast. Mostly clear Kodiak Island, Alaska Peninsula, and the eastern Aleutians, as well as the Pribilofs could see some clearing. Next system there off to the southwest or the lower left-hand corner, they're starting to spread some rain up toward the Aleutians, and that'll push up into the area from, say, Amchitka Island eastward to almost Atka tomorrow afternoon, picking the winds up mostly over the west central Aleutian areas and not so much toward Chimay too. Otherwise, high pressure keeping the Bering Sea in a light wind pattern with some clearing and sunshine for the Pribilofs, eastern Aleutians, Bristol Bay, Alaska Peninsula, south central Alaska, partly mostly sunny tomorrow. And of course, temperatures will be a little warmer as a result of that. And mostly sunny also over the southern southeast coast. Still wet and unsettled, slowly weakening low center there near Cape Lisburne and Point Hope, and then another one up over Mackenzie Bay. That's going to keep areas of rain and showers over the central and northern part of the state. Again, lights not so much into the Yukon Valley, upper Yukon Valley there, with maybe a few showers moving in to the area there, but nothing really heavy expected. And then for Wednesday, mostly sunny, southern half of the state and southern Panhandle, temperatures into the upper 70s possibly for the southern southeast coast. Warm front spreading moisture up to the eastern North Gulf Coast, so it looks pretty wet from the area, say, from Cordova eastward into the northern Panhandle. Near Juneau or to the north, Haines, Skagway, chance of rain, Yakutat, Elfin Cove. Otherwise, trough there, keeping it wet and a little breezy on the Arctic coast. Not too much on the winds, though, but brisk wind advisory level winds possible for the central coast. And then wind and rain with the next system pushing into the slowly into the eastern Aleutians. Unmak Island, best chance of rain, just a chance of maybe some afternoon light rain for Unalaska Island, but wet and windy for the southern Bering Sea and the western central Aleutians. Chance of showers, southwest Kodiak Island, otherwise high pressure over the eastern northern Bering Sea, keeping skies variably cloudy to partly sunny and winds light over much of the southern part of the state. Lows for tonight, mid to upper 30s central Arctic coast, otherwise 40s everywhere else. Lower 40s out in the western areas, especially the Bering Sea locations, to near 50 in the greater Fairbanks area, upper 40s to lower 50s south central Alaska, Copper River Basin, mid to in some cases upper 50s for the southeast coast, upper 40s Kodiak Island, mid 40s for Bristol Bay. Highs tomorrow, 55 to 60 for Bristol Bay and Kodiak Island, 60 to 65 south central Alaska, mid 60s in the Copper River Basin, as well as the mid and upper Tanana Valley areas. Eagle about 65, but 60 at Fairbanks, and then 50s out to the west, upper 40s for the Seward Peninsula. And highs in the lower to mid 70s there for the southern panhandle, otherwise mid 60s for the northern southeast coast, and 50 to 55 about sums it up for the Aleutians and the Bering Sea there, Pribilof Islands, lower 50s for the southwest coast. Lows the following morning, about like tomorrow morning, except we got some upper 30s now into the Brooks Range and the Tuvik Pass and Arctic Village, upper 30s, otherwise lower 40s now for Bettles down in toward Tanana, mid 40s there for the upper Tanana Valley area, 38, kind of cool there for Eagle, lower 40s for the Copper River Basin areas, otherwise 40s over much of interior Alaska, near 50 for Kodiak Island. Warmest areas will be over the Panhandle, lows in the mid to upper 50s. Highs 70 to 78, say, for the southern Panhandle, otherwise mid to upper 60s to the north. Near 70 for the Copper River Basin, 60s most of southern Alaska.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Moving on to flying weather. IFR from the North Slope Arctic coast southwestward across the northwest interior and the northern Bering Sea southward to just north of the Aleutians, shimmying at 2 IFR, but VFR for the remainder of the Aleutians, Alaska Peninsula, Kodiak Island, VFR right up into Cook Inlet and southern Kenai Peninsula, IFR Prince William Sound, North Gulf Coast, and the northern half of the Panhandle, as well as the south coast, and some VFR up over the eastern interior. And for the afternoon, Tuesday afternoon, IFR northern half of the southeast coast there to Yakutat, marginal VFR, North Gulf Coast, Prince William Sound, the Passage Canal, south central Alaska into the Kuskokwim Valley, basically VFR into Bristol Bay to the eastern Aleutians, Pribilof Islands becoming VFR, IFR spreading eastward to Adak and Atka, VFR into the central and eastern interior, North Slope VFR, but IFR right along the western Arctic coast and into the, at least the northern Koyukuk Valley, IFR covering the Kobuk Valley westward, much of the western interior, northern Bering Sea. And for the Wednesday morning time frame, solid IFR, western Arctic coast, southward through the Bering Strait, all of the Bering Sea and the Aleutians, IFR, Bering Sea side of the Alaska Peninsula, and into Kuskokwim Bay, VFR, southern Alaska and the interior, some marginal VFR, Prince William Sound, North Gulf Coast, and looks like Resurrection Bay there on the southeast part of the Kenai Peninsula. VFR Kodiak Island, although some IFR hugging the southeastern coast there near Sitkinak and those areas. IFR for the Panhandle. And moving on to Wednesday afternoon, IFR for the Arctic coast, marginal VFR for the North Slope, Brooks Range, northwest interior from Koyukuk Valley westward, Kivalina and Shishmaref, Buckland, Kotzebue, Selawik, all marginal VFR. Yukon Delta, same thing. Some IFR on the south side of the Seward Peninsula. And most of the St. Lawrence Island area looks IFR. And most of the Bering Sea, central and western Bering Sea and Aleutians are all IFR. VFR for the Alaska Peninsula and Bristol Bay, Kodiak Island VFR, and southern Alaska VFR all the way north to the southern slopes of the eastern Brooks Range, and you get into some marginal VFR there. IFR for the eastern Arctic coast, VFR for the Panhandle. And for passes, Anatuvik, IFR tomorrow, Adigan, IFR, Lake Clark and Merrill, marginal VFR improving to VFR, probably during the morning hours, and then that'll last through the afternoon for the VFR flying. Same thing for Rainy, starting out kind of marginal, becoming VFR. Windy, same trend, starting out with the lower conditions in the morning, becoming VFR probably by mid to late morning through the afternoon. Isabel, good VFR the entire day. Same thing for Mintasta, VFR day coming up, either approach. Tanita, VFR. Portage, IFR to marginal VFR. Slow improvement for Portage Pass. And Chilkoot and White, IFR. Looking at the freezing levels, cool air aloft there over the west and southwest interior, and then a good gradient there over the Gulf of Alaska and along and just south of the Alaska Peninsula. 12,000 feet over the Panhandle, 4,000 to 6,000 feet over the Aleutians and Alaska Peninsula. And for icing, areas of mixed or rime icing of the isolated moderate variety, mostly light then, for the northern half of the state to the Arctic coast and the Chukchi Sea into the Bering Strait coast, and then just some scattered areas of icing possible there south or across the northern Bering Sea into the Yukon Delta and lower Yukon Valley. Icing free southern Alaska, the Aleutians, and the Panhandle. Jet stream, westerlies across the Bering Sea at about 60 knots, take a turn to the northeast, pick up 95 to 115 knots from the Kenai Peninsula and up across the upper Tanana Valley there. And at 9,000 feet, westerlies 50 to 55 knots right through the central interior, blowing across and along the mid and upper Yukon River Valley. Lighter to the south, lighter to the north, and pretty light out over the Bering Sea and across the Aleutians, a little breezy in the Panhandle. 3,000 feet, light winds for the southeast coast, southern Alaska, but westerlies 50 knots in the interior there, northern interior, and some increasing winds moving into the central and west central Aleutians. Turbulence, widespread considerable moderate chop up over the central interior as well as the southern southeast coast and around Amchitka.
Space weather affects technologies. As conditions develop, we put out alerts, warnings, and watches to our customers so they can take action.
The Space Weather Prediction Center has had a long-standing relationship with the power industry, so they've been aware that solar storms, the geomagnetic storm piece of that, can affect the operation of their systems and induce extra currents and loads on those systems that can either trip those systems offline or in the worst of cases, cause damage. That relationship goes back for several decades. In fact, a big incident in 1989 where part of Quebec was tripped offline that affected something like 6 million customers for about 9 hours. I think that really raised the awareness in the power industries.
When we get the alert, we watch the grid and start looking for issues. Are we seeing a decline in voltage? Are we seeing equipment failures? And we readjust the system to try to mitigate those problems, try to keep the lights on and keep it from going out.
Averaging about 500, 550 kilometers per second.
If we didn't have this early warning, we wouldn't see it until our sensor saw it. Getting more information quicker and faster before the storm hits, not during the storm, is a big improvement.
In the long term, I think what we need and what we're moving toward, the U.S. as a whole, is better modeling, fully understanding this phenomenon, understanding how it would impact specific systems.
Rather than actually experiencing a storm, we can simulate storms in our software and see what the impact is. We try to get ahead of it. We always plan that if there's an outage, how can we keep the lights on? What's the best process to prevent it?
In the end, 5-10 years from now, there's going to be a whole mix of operational procedures driven by what we do on prediction and warning. And then there also will probably be some level of hardware controls to ensure the reliability of the grid.
Space weather affects technologies. As conditions develop, we put out alerts, warnings, and watches to our customers so they can take action.
There's different types of impacts on communication systems, and the HF we call the high frequency, which is that band of communications 3 to 30 megahertz. But it's a very important band of radio communication because it's used widespread. It's used, for example, by the airlines.
HF radio is most commonly used for position reporting when you're going across the ocean airspace, which is devoid of radar. And ATC can't see you, so it's up to you to report your position and your altitude and your speed.
HF works great most of the time, except during a big flare. And during a big flare, that HF communication capability could be gone within a minute or two. So as soon as we see something happening in there or we see a flare, it's one of the first things we do is alert the aviation community, hey, big flare, HF's going to be impacted.
Once we know that there's an event going on, then the aviation industry and the airlines can react to that. They can alter their routes over the poles. They can lower the altitudes that they're flying at, or maybe decide not to fly at all in the interest of their passenger safety.
So that's just one example of how HF is used, but the emergency response community will use it a lot too. It's one of their primary backups.
When you've lost connectivity between certain government agencies, it gives you that long-range coverage to talk from out-of-state to federal governments or from the FEMA locations to the state emergency operations centers.
So if you've got a big hurricane impact in the coastline, whatever big city, we've got the cell towers down and whatnot, we've got emergency communication folks in there. Those folks are very familiar with space weather and how it impacts their systems.
Here in recent years, it was used during Katrina when we had a lot of communications outages down there. It was also used during Hurricane Ike. There was an outage of the telephone circuits with the Texas State Emergency Office, so it was used in both those situations.
So when we talk about backup, especially for the airlines, typically they'll have SATCOM, so that'll be satellite communication.
The satellite technology that emergency responders use could be GPSs, could be satellite phones, satellite data terminals.
Space weather events can impact SATCOMs. The impact can range from a nuisance to loss of a spacecraft. So we will give them the heads up. If we have space weather events, flares, whatnot, they need to know what's impacting their systems. Situational awareness is key. Time is of essence to these folks. Again, it's life and death.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Moving on to marine forecasts. For the south coast of the Panhandle, northwest winds 15 to 20 knots, seas around 7 feet. Lighter winds up on the north coast from the west-southwest 10 to 15 knots. Lynn Canal, Glacier Bay, northern inner channels, southerlies at 15. Stevens Passage specifically, winds will be northwest tomorrow at 10 knots. And for Clarence Strait, northwest winds 15 knots. For the day on Wednesday, Clarence Strait, northwesterlies 15 knots, Stevens Passage northwest at 10, and for Lynn Canal, south winds 10 knots, seas pretty slight at 2 feet. For the south coast, winds will be northwest 15 to 20 knots, and west-northwest at 10 knots for the north coast with seas 5 feet. Small craft advisories for Cook Inlet tomorrow. Northern Cook Inlet, they'll be from the south at 25 knots, southwest 25 south of the Forelands. Otherwise, west winds 20 knots for the Kamishak Bay area, the Barren Islands, and the North Gulf Coast, with seas running 6 to 8 feet. For Prince William Sound, light variable winds at 10 knots. And for Wednesday, Prince William Sound, light variable winds, 10 knots or so, continue with seas at about 2 feet. Small craft advisories for the eastern North Gulf Coast for northeast winds increasing to 25 knots, seas building to 6 feet. Northeast 20 knots for the western North Gulf Coast. Barren Islands, north winds 20 knots. And for Wednesday, Kamishak Bay, you'll be looking at a northwest wind at 15 knots. And Cook Inlet, northerlies 10 to 15 knots with seas 2 to 3 feet. Kodiak Island, variable to southwest winds 10 to 20 knots with 4 to 6 foot seas for Tuesday. The Alaska Peninsula, variable to northeast winds 10 to 15 knots with 5 to 6 foot seas. Bristol Bay, southwest 15 knots, seas 4 feet. And for Wednesday, Bristol Bay, north winds 15 knots, and the Alaska Peninsula, northeasterlies 15 to 20 knots, seas 3 to 6 feet. And then for Kodiak Island, small craft advisories for northeast winds at 30 knots with 7 foot seas. Eastern Aleutians tomorrow, east to northeast winds 10 to 15 knots with seas around 5 feet. Central Aleutians, east-southeast 15 to 20 knots, 4 to 5 foot seas. And small craft advisories for the western Aleutians, east winds at 25 knots with 7 foot seas. And moving on to Wednesday, small craft advisories for the western Aleutians, east-northeast 30 knots, seas 10 feet. And small craft advisories for the central and eastern Aleutians as well, all from the east and southeast at 30 knots with seas anywhere from 9 to 10 feet. And for the southwest coast, Tuesday, tomorrow, southwest winds 20 knots, seas 6 feet. Pribilof Islands, pretty light southwest breeze at 10 knots, seas down to 4 feet. Southwest at 20 for the northern Bering Sea and the waters around St. Matthew Island. And gale warnings for Norton Sound. Southwest winds 35 knots with 7-foot seas. Otherwise, small craft advisories to St. Lawrence Island for westerlies at 30 knots. And for Wednesday, much lighter winds for Norton Sound down to 20 knots from the southwest. St. Lawrence Island, southwest 15 knots. South 15 for the Yukon Delta coast. North 15 for the Kuskokwim Delta coast. Pribilof Islands, east at 20 and south 15 for the northern Bering Sea. For the eastern Wolford Sea coast, anywhere from west to south winds at 20 knots tomorrow, seas and ice-free waters to 4 feet. Brisk wind advisories for the central Arctic coast, northeast winds 25 knots. And small craft advisories for the western Arctic coast, all the way down to Wales for 30-knot winds with seas running 9 to 10 feet. And for Wednesday, from Wales to Cape Beaufort, northwest winds 15 knots. North 15 knots for the western and central Arctic coast, and for the east side there, winds will be southwest 15 to 20 knots. For tonight, high wind warning out for the eastern Norton Sound area and the Lotto Hills, Stebbins, St. Michael, Unalakleet, winds 35 gusting 65 miles an hour. Otherwise, rain covering much of the western interior and some rain into the central interior, drying out over south central Alaska. And also the Alaska Peninsula, Kodiak Island. That holds through tomorrow. A lot of sunshine expected for those areas into southern Alaska. Stays wet over especially the northwest interior, but winds will be much lighter. Next system spreading rain into the western Aleutians. Some scattered showers over the eastern North Gulf Coast and northern Panhandle. Some sunshine over the southern southeast coast. That continues into Wednesday with temperatures pushing into the mid, maybe upper 70s for areas of the southern Panhandle. Cooler and more showery with a chance of rain in the north. Sunny over southern Alaska. Showers and rain from the central interior north of the Yukon River to the Arctic coast. More wind and rain into the Aleutians.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.